Hey, welcome to Next Level Method Podcast. I'm Richard Ryerson.
And I'm Matt Lilly.
And we're here to help you take your life to the next level. Let's get started. We have Leon Logothetis on the show today. Global adventurer, TV host. I'd seen it. I need to watch it. I saw that on Discovery Plus. I have Discovery Plus.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
The Kindness Diaries. I'm scrolling through that, so I need to revisit that. Love this stuff. All about being kind. Adventurer, traveled the globe.
Right.
Hitchhiked across. Was a broker. Hated life. Chucked it all and started traveling around the world, searching for humanity, that connectedness, which I thought was really good. My big takeaway for this, I love how he said at the end, if we can learn how to find that still place, to be that kind of calm, composed force in this chaotic world, to me that was great. I love this guy. You've met him, I guess, a couple of weeks ago. You saw him speak. What was your takeaway from this?
Yeah, I think all of us at some point maybe had a dream to just take off, and whether it was right out of college or later in life or whatever, just to kind of take off and just go travel kind of with a backpack on your back. Maybe I'm the only crazy one, but out in the world and just discover what's out there. Yeah. And that's what he did, right? He literally just, in one example, he goes across the United States hitchhiking, and another one he has a motorcycle I think that he circumnavigates the globe, starts in LA and ends in LA, right? And then in another adventure, he starts in Alaska and goes all the way to the tip of South America. So he just goes out there and dreams up these adventures and just goes and does them. And sometimes it takes months and months, and for a lot of us that's not practical, but it's nice to be able to live vicariously through him and his adventures, so he can bring back some of those rich gems of humanity that say, there's when I heard him talk before, it's there's the overwhelming theme was there's much more good in the world than there is not good.
And I think that's the key to having, and that's great that we can live vicariously through him, because I don't know if a lot of us would have the courage or the to do what he did.
Right.
Because I think even myself, I think I would be afraid to hitchhike. I would be afraid to ask to stay in somebody's house. But he has so many great stories. And you need to listen to the episode and some of the great examples he gave that are just so inspiring, and check him out. Thanks for being a supporter of Next Level Method. Go check us out and follow us on your favorite podcast application. Go to nextlevelmethod.com to learn more of everything that's coming up, particularly in 2022. So let's get on with this great conversation with Leon here on Next Level Method. Well, Leon, welcome to the show. So excited to meet you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, I'm envious of how many countries you've been to. I was in the Marine Corps and a pilot. I've been to, I think, 97 countries that I've been to. How many have you been to? Over 100, right?
Yes, I've been to 101 countries.
But you've probably been a lot of places. My places have probably been a little more, except a couple times in the Marine Corps. But the worst place I was at was Kenya doing famine relief. That was the most austere condition I was in. But with the airlines, I'm staying at 5-star hotels, so maybe a little different. I'm curious about what prompted you to kind of travel the world, right? What led you to be this world traveler?
Well, I used to be a broker in the city of London, and on the outside I had everything you could ever want, but on the inside I had pretty much nothing you would ever want. And I've shared this often, but I stumbled across a movie called The Motorcycle Diaries, which is about a man traveling around South America relying on kindness. And there was something about that movie that truly touched me in a very profound way. And to cut a long story short, I quit my job and started to travel the world relying on kindness. And as a kid, I'd always had this adventurous spirit. And I found myself with an opportunity to kind of quench the thirst of travel and adventure. And that's why I started on this little journey of mine.
I'm fascinated. A couple of questions on that. Did you have enough? Was money an issue? Did you have enough money saved up so you could do that? Or were you just like, you know what, I'm selling everything and I'm just going to try to live day by day? I guess I was curious about what prompted you to do that. Because if I look at myself doing that, I'm thinking, how would I survive? But sometimes when people do what you're doing, they're like, let's just chuck it all. And I want to see, because that's the real experience, right? Where you're just I'm going to see where this takes me.
Yeah, look, I was a broker. I definitely came from the capacity to have financial stability, and that on some level made it easier to go and do what I needed to do. But the most important thing for me was the capacity to connect, was the capacity to take my pain and to kind of transmute it into gold by connecting with humanity and connecting with my own sense of humanity as well.
How quick did that happen? I mean, you set on this path. Did it take very long to you to kind of start to see, wow, was it like a slap in the face, or was it kind of like a slow fade into this kind of realization of you know what I mean, from the old to the new?
I mean, look, one of the first adventures I did was I walked across America, hitchhiked across America.
Wow.
And when I was in Times Square, because I started the adventure in Times Square, for the first hour or two, I wasn't really getting much love. No one really wanted to help. That's fine. But then someone did help.
Yeah.
And from that point on, it was kind of like a snowball effect, whereby I always found someone to help. Yes, people were always rejecting me as well, but there was ultimately always someone to connect with. So I would say it was actually pretty fast.
Yeah.
It actually happened pretty quickly when I started to, for me, the medicine that I needed was human connection. And that medicine is available to all of us pretty much at all times, if we so wish.
And I've heard Leon was in Wichita 2 weeks ago, I think, and so I met with him for breakfast, and then I saw him speak that evening. But I like that story you told, and I'll let you tell it. But I think early on, I think you were in Chicago or somewhere, and the lady who handed you the keys. I mean, was that fairly early on in that in your process?
Yeah, so basically, on my journey across America, I ended up in Indianapolis, and I started chatting with this lady who had a 1-year-old kid. Told her what I was doing, trying to get from Times Square to the Hollywood sign, relying on the kindness of strangers. She was in Indianapolis for a wedding. She lived in Chicago, which was about 3 hours away. And she said to me, "If you can find your way to Chicago, here are my only set of keys. You can eat the chili from my fridge, you can sleep on my couch, and you can leave the keys in the flower pot the next morning."
That's insane.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes when I give speeches, I say, my inside voice was like, "There's something wrong with this woman."
Right.
And my outside voice was like, "All right." So I took the keys, found my way to Chicago, ate the chili from her fridge, slept on her couch, and left the keys in the flower pot the next morning. So it was a lesson in humility, really, in the sense that here's someone that doesn't have any idea who I am, and is willing to share her spirit with me and her house with me. And it changed many preconceptions I had about the world. Preconceptions that we get from the news, right? And again, I'm not saying bad things don't happen. Clearly bad things do happen. But good things happen too.
I'm curious, I mean, I think we all know, it's kind of like counseling I've received is like, well, you want to be a better, you want to receive love in your life, then be loving.
Love, right? Yep, be loving, right.
You want to have a good marriage, be a better spouse, all those kind of things, right? I'm guessing the key to this is obviously you're initiating the kindness in some fit form or fashion. Somehow you did something to gain her trust in some sort of fashion, or was it intentional on your part, or were you just kind of, I'm just going to be kind no matter what happens? What do you think it was that made her kind of trust you so implicitly or explicitly?
Yeah, sure. I think that ultimately many of us live consistently from up here.
Yeah.
And on some level, one has to, right? We got to the moon because on some level we lived from up here. Mm-hmm. But the truest of wealth, let's say, is when you live from down here, when you live from your heart, when you live from a place of intuition. And what I do, generally, is I try and not communicate with people from my mind, but I communicate with them from my heart to their heart. And if you do that, you build a bond much, much quicker.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that transparency and that vulnerability that just unlocks so many doors, right? How does that manifest itself? I mean, I love that. It makes sense. I mean, but how do you do that? How do you open up the kimono and show them your heart? I mean, what do you do?
Well, I've had many years of having my heart not be open.
Right.
But what opened my heart, I would say, is the emotional pain that I felt in my life, and more importantly, facing that emotional pain.
Yeah.
Because the more pain that one faces, and one actually deals with, by sharing, by going to therapy, by doing whatever it is we need to do to get our pain out, the more that our hearts are kind of, what's the word? It's like they want to share more. Our hearts want to share more. It's like a snowball effect, right? And that's kind of the way I did it. And the way I do it. And I don't do it perfectly, of course.
No, I hear what you're saying. I'm thinking back to times where I've let down those barriers, and I try to do this on a more intentional basis all the time, but I notice every time that I've had any kind of breakthrough from a relationship, or we've crossed any threshold or done something, it's because I shared authentically and vulnerably with this person. And when you see it in action, it's like the floodgates just happen, because it's like, whoa, I don't know. It's like, it seems common sense when you think about it, but it's like when you see it happen, it's pretty remarkable. And I can't imagine intentionally living every single day, like doing what you had to do. You're not going to a broker job. You're just trying to see where the next day takes you. That's had to be pretty powerful.
Yeah, and I think there's a very good reason why we don't kind of live the way you just explained and the way I explained, because most of us are used to having our vulnerability squashed.
Yeah.
Most of us are used to having like our truth denigrated. So if that happens from a child, we get conditioned not to speak our truth, because why would we? So I would say the first act of changing the way you live is to share your truth, but with someone safe.
Yeah, and I wrote some notes from your talk the other day, and it said, "Share our pain, or it will something us." And I can't read my writing in that word right there. It says share, but it'll what?
It will consume us.
Consume us. That's a horrible. You're right. Now that I see it, consume. So share our pain, or it will consume us. And I actually shared this with a friend of mine. But so share our pain, or it will consume us. But to your point, share it and you said the other day, share it from a space, like with one or two people in a safe space or in a supported space. Is that what? Am I paraphrasing that correctly?
100%. Because if you share it in an unsafe space, what's going to happen? They're gonna squash you.
Get bullied, whatever. Yeah.
And so when you say that, share our pain, or it will consume us, I guess, can you explain that a little bit deeper for me?
So basically, I'll talk from my personal experience. For many years, I had a lot of pain, depressed, isolated, anxiety. Those things still happen, right? But for many years, I never shared any of these things with anyone. So to the degree where I didn't really know that I was depressed. I didn't really know I was anxious. I didn't really know I had needs. I remember once I went to a therapist and she said, "Do you know what? You know that you have needs." And I was like, "Needs? Well, what are needs?" And I just didn't understand it. Because every time I had shared my pain, every time I had shared with the world, with those close to me, I'd been squashed. So, and therefore my pain was consuming me. But slowly, through reading books, through going to therapy, through going on my adventures, I started to feel safer to share my pain with certain people. And as you mentioned earlier, Richard, the floodgates opened. Because there was so much pain. And I'm not unique. We all have it. But few of us deal with it. And as I said in that speech, it will consume you. And that's just a fact. And that's the end. It will. There's no getting around it.
And as you say that, and I know, I'm sure you've looked at statistics. We've talked about the statistics on the show that, and it was shocked us when we first started looking into this, but, they said that, like 10 years ago, if you ask somebody, who would you call at 2 a.m., how many people do you have a call at 2 a.m. if you have an emergency? And they're like, 3 to 5 people was kind of the average. And now for a lot of people, it's actually 0. They actually at 2 a.m. in the morning, they don't have anybody they feel like that they could call, that they could trust to help them. And I'm like, holy, bat things or whatever. I'm like, holy cow, that's not good, right? I mean, we've got social media, we've got all the social platforms, we've got the new metaverse, whatever the heck that is. We've got all this way to be connected, yet the loneliness, the isolation, the depression, the suicide is, as and COVID obviously, I think, blew that up and made it even more, I wouldn't say blow it up, but made it more prevalent that this was actually happening. The underlying causes were all coming to the surface. So I guess, what do you see as some of the solutions to that, or some of the, because I've been reading your book, the Be Kind, Go Be Kind book, and it addresses, it kind of gives you action steps, right, to kind of lean into that. But if somebody's out there and they're feeling alone or depressed or in that, I know my Achilles heel is asking for help. I know that. So for me to travel across, that would be a big, brave thing for me to lean in and ask hundreds of people for help to make it from one point to the other. But for somebody that's just lonely and having this stuff going on, what would you recommend? Or I guess, what would you tell them to do?
Well, look, there's 2 answers to that. The first answer is, if you have someone you can share with, clearly share.
Right?
Clearly reach out to them. Okay? It's very easy to send a text to 3, 4, 5 people at the same time, right? Someone is going to respond. Someone. Yeah. The second part of the answer is, if you don't have anyone, what do you do? And if you don't have a single person in your life who you can reach out to and who you can share to, that is problematic. Right? Because as human beings, we need to be connected. As human beings, we need to feel like we are not alone. And at that point, it becomes reaching out to a therapist. It becomes reaching out to a hotline of some sort. It becomes reaching out again. The answer is the same to the first part of the answer I gave you, but it's reaching out to some institution, right? Whether it's this institution of psychotherapy, whether it's the institution of some kind of hotline, but the answer is the same. You have to reach out. You have to share your pain. You have to share your feelings. Because, you know what I'm about to say, if you don't do it, it'll consume you. Right. And that's just the way it will be. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. Doesn't mean there's anything necessarily wrong with you. It's just the way it works.
Right.
What do you guys think about when you find yourself in that spot where you feel like you have no value? If you go and you add value to somebody else, even if you don't feel like you can, and you do something where you feel worthless on the inside, but you go in and you intentionally give kindness or add value to somebody else, isn't that a great antidote, do you think, at least to start the process? What do you think about when you hear me say that?
I relate to it 100%.
Yeah.
There were times when I was living in London, when I was in a terrible, terrible place. And I would be walking in the streets of London in a bit of a fog. And I would see a homeless man sitting outside McDonald's. And I would go up to him and I'd say, hey man, would you like something to eat? And they'd be like, yeah, I really would. I would go to McDonald's, buy him something, or her, have a quick chat with her or him, and move on. And it made me feel better.
Yeah.
It kind of, it's the same thing, but it kind of made me feel connected. And in that moment of connection, my worries dissipated a little bit. So it's a very valid point. It's a beautiful point.
Yeah, I always think that's kind of, I know the times when I start feeling sorry for myself, or I feel down, or I don't feel like, what's the point of, does anybody this or what? And if you go do intentionally, even though internally, or it's really kind of up here that's telling you this, right? But here, when you do something like that, it just changes, for me, it changes the whole paradigm when you do that. That's a starting point for me. I think when you were kind of asking that question, Matt, I thought, but Yeah.
And it opens your heart, right? As you connect with, I think it's like a jump start, right? Kind of like putting the jumper cables on on your heart or something, right? It's kind of like that thing's not working too well. Let's get a little energy in there by contributing, and I think that's big
perspective shift, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and typically in a lot of those situations, you're seeing people that at least have, physical life circumstances that are different than yours. Like if you're talking about the homeless person, I've done different charitable things or worked with different charities throughout the years, and I think that's always the biggest aha for me, is that no matter what's happening, there's always somebody who has it somewhat to degree, at least their food or their shelter or their transportation or something is not quite what mine is in that specific moment, right? And it's like I get perspective and realize that I've got a lot to be grateful for.
Absolutely.
I guess is what I'm saying. In that moment, I'm like, you know what? This person maybe even is happier than I am, and they have less physical things than I do. I need to be grateful for the things I have. If they can be grateful for what they have, I think I was sharing this with Leon when we visited, but I was in India. I was out actually in the country there, and I was running along a road for exercise. I wasn't running away from anything, but I was running along a road for exercise, and I got to the end of this road, and there was a man with a thatched hut that had a big tarp over his roof where it had kind of fallen in, and he was, but he was extremely he smiled the whole time. He was laughing the whole. I couldn't understand anything he said because he was speaking in another language, but he was super. You could just tell he was super happy, and it was because he had a house. And he had a broken down tractor that I'm sure ran, and he had like 30 goats. And I'm sure in that part of the world where I was at, he was like financially successful. Mm-hmm. But more than that, he was just very grateful. You could tell he was just grateful for what he had. And certainly in my experience at that point, it was like, wow, I need to really be grateful for everything I have: family, friends, a job, a place to live, a place to eat, all these things. If he can be happy, I can be happy type thing, right?
Yeah.
And I wasn't shaming myself. It was truly experiencing the joy that he was just happy to be alive and happy to, like, he was proud of what he had. And I was just like, wow, that's amazing. Because he should be proud. I mean, everything's a perspective, right?
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me, Lane, you talked about that I was watching a video, I guess it was a TED Talk, and you had kind of a similar experience where you came across a homeless man, right? And you saw his gratitude and his humility and his kind of, his perspective of kind of what Matt was saying, that appreciation of what he had, right?
That was a moment that changed me forever. I was in Pittsburgh. This was during the Kindness Diaries season 1, where I took a vintage yellow motorbike and I circumnavigated the world, relying entirely on kindness. And there was a little bit of a twist, and the twist was that unsuspecting Good Samaritans received a life-changing gift. But I ended up chatting with this fella. I would go up to people in the street and I'd say, hey, can I stay in your house tonight? And most people would say, no, of course not. I don't even know who you are. Right? So I went up to this guy. I said, can I stay in your house tonight? And he goes, look, I'm really sorry, I'm homeless. So I feel a lot of shame. I've just asked a homeless man to stay in his house. But then as I'm about to walk off, he says, well, hold on. If you want, you can stay with me tonight. I will feed you. I'll protect you. And I will give you some clothes. And I was like, whoa. Like, again, my inside voice was like, Leon, you're not staying on the streets of Pittsburgh tonight. But there was that little counterintuitive part of me that said, son, you're staying on the streets of Pittsburgh tonight. And that's exactly what happened. And he was a man who had nothing. Nothing. He had like one bag that he hid in the bushes so that people didn't steal it. And he was willing to give me everything. And he taught me some profound lessons. He taught me that kindness is free, irrespective of how cool you think you are or how cool you think you're not, etc., etc. Kindness is free. It's a choice. And you can choose to be mean, but you can also choose to be kind. And he also taught me that the truest of wealth is really in our hearts, not in our wallets.
Yeah.
And it was a very, very moving, profound moment. I ended up sleeping on the streets with him, and he did protect me. And it just changed my perception and made me more grateful, more humble. Didn't make me perfect. There were still moments of ingratitude and lack of humility, right? But I always go back to that night. And if Tony can do it, then why can't I? It's literally that simple.
And two things I wanted to ask you from just listening to some of your stories and stuff. One, I'm still, I guess every time you say that there's people that said that you couldn't stay with them, I'm still shocked. And you said it was like the majority, right? Like 80% of people, 90% of people that you say, can you stay in my home? They would say no, right? Just out and out no. Which honestly just shocks me, to be honest with you, a little bit. But then I also heard you say, so I'm curious about that, but then I'm also heard you say, I think, that like, especially I think when you traveled hitchhike across America, that you were really, I think one of the takeaways was just how actually gracious people were. So how do those two things coincide, I guess, or live together?
I mean, look, if a random person comes up to you on the street, I'll talk for myself. If a random person comes up to me in the street, right, says to me, "Oh, hello, can I stay in your house tonight?"
Fair enough. Now I didn't quite put myself all the way there.
Yeah, I'd be like, well, yeah, probably not.
Right.
If it comes with a story,
right?
It actually happened. I haven't shared this before, I don't think, but I was in by the beach in Santa Monica, and I started chatting with this guy who told me that he was walking. I think it was the Pacific Coast Trail.
Yeah. There's a trail. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, he told me he was going to sleep on the beach, and I don't know. I was like, "You're the kindness guy, Leon. You did these shows. There's no camera right now. Here's your choice. Do you walk the walk, or do you just tell him no? You know what? Whatever. Yeah, don't even offer for him to stay in the house." And I ended up offering for him to stay in the house, and he did. And nothing happened. I wasn't murdered, but I felt that he was safe.
Right.
I would never have let him stay in my house if I hadn't felt the man was safe.
Right.
So my intuition was the arbiter of whether he stays or not.
Right.
Speaking of on the intuition piece, I've always kind of argued, or I've tried to, even myself, listen to the intuitive side more. As an aviator, we're taught to listen to our intuition quite a bit. I think we're way more, that intuition is way more powerful than we give it credit. How does that proven true to you, true or false? Has your intuition, by and large, been a good arbiter of truth for you during this whole experience?
So at the beginning of this chat, you asked me about my travels, right? And how it is that I ended up traveling, and what I believe kind of the things I learned by traveling. Well, I didn't understand my intuition when I started traveling. Yes, I started traveling prior to leaving as a broker, but I went to places like Thailand. I went all over the world. And I remember one exact example where my intuition was not present, or I didn't listen to my intuition. I was in Thailand. I was with a friend, and a tuk-tuk driver, which is a kind of like a small motorized taxi, comes up to us and says, I want to take you guys to this amazing party. And my intuition said, do not get in the tuk-tuk. But my friend kept saying, no, don't worry, let's get in the tuk-tuk. I said, this is a bad idea. We shouldn't get in the tuk-tuk. He's like, no, let's get in the tuk-tuk. And I was like, all right, fine. We got on the tuk-tuk, and the guy didn't take us to an amazing party per se. He took us to an opium den, right? People that, you didn't want to mess with. We left, but I share that story because that was an example of not following my intuition, and I never forgot it. And moving forward from that day, when I feel something's not right, I just don't go there.
Yeah.
Even if it's the simplest thing, like I'll be on my Vespa, I have a Vespa, and there's an intuition that says, don't go down that road, turn left. I'll turn left. I just won't go down that road. I'll just turn left. For whatever reason, maybe there was nothing down there. I don't know. Maybe there was. Who knows? But I will listen to the inner voice to the best of my ability. Not perfectly, right? Like you now, both of you, and the viewers and the listeners are listening and watching the best version of Leon, right? So you're like, oh my goodness, Leon, he's so in touch with his intuition. He's like on the path, right? But the best version of Leon will probably not be here when I get off this podcast, yeah? So it's a question of kind of doing it but not doing it perfectly, and knowing with a sense of humility that there are there are many paths that we can take, and sometimes we'll take the wrong ones, and that's okay.
Yeah, it's funny when you kind of replay the tape and all those times where you do miss it. I know, at least for me, and you replay the tape, there's always a couple instances where those intuitive signs, signals were there, you just ignored them. Right. When you replay the tape, you're like, oh yeah, there was a couple.
I remember
there
thinking
were 3 times
I should one more. I remember thinking probably shouldn't have another drink. Yeah, right. And then I did anyway.
Yeah, it does take work and some intentionality to listen to it, right, and pay attention to it.
And it takes getting out of your everyday life.
Yeah.
It takes getting out of your comfort zone. I mean, you know this better than I do. You know, being in the military, you see things that most of us never see.
Yep.
You experience things that most of us will never experience. Yet having those experiences, I would imagine, puts you on a different plane to most of us, because you have an awareness of your situation. You have an awareness of those around you. You have an awareness of the experience you're in that most people, it would just fly off the top of their head.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. I guess for me, I mean, and even knowing from being in the aviation piece, where the key to success of being a professional aviator is you're constantly fighting for the big picture, which means you have to constantly be listening to your intuition. You got to be constantly relying on your training, constantly, you know, there's a whole bunch of data filtering, right? Both external and internal, that you have to kind of get comfortable with. So I guess that makes sense, yeah. But I can think back to those handful of times inside and outside of aviation where I didn't listen to my intuition, and I can always go back to, God, it was giving me clear signals. Once I do a post-mortem on what happened, I was like, good God, there were 3 instances or 4 instances sometimes where I should have listened to my intuition. It's that power. I mean, I believe it's that powerful. And I know I think I've mentioned this on the show a couple times, but I can't tell you how many times in 30 years of flying where somebody in the cockpit says, hang on a second, something doesn't feel right. And you stop and you do and you look, and it's almost 100% of the time there's something that somebody missed. And you're taught to stop and listen to it, because it could literally be the difference between, you know, doing something stupid or
life
not,
and death,
you know?
right?
But yeah, from a safety standpoint, I'm curious just on kind of the logistics of traveling around the world, and particularly the hitchhiking thing. It seems to me, particularly in this day and age, that it would be extremely difficult to hitchhike. So 2 questions on the hitchhiking piece is, number one, how hard was it? You probably got better at it. You probably found some tactics to get a ride. But second of all, were you ever scared? Did you ever get in a car and thinking, okay, this was a mistake, right? Not necessarily that your life was in danger, but like, oh my God, I wish I wasn't in this car with this person for whatever reason. Just out of curiosity.
I've never been in a car that I didn't feel safe in, because I won't get into the car in the first place.
Right.
Got it.
Right. So, like I said, it's just
the intuition part. Yeah.
Yeah. You just follow that. Have there been moments on my journeys where people have said, you can come and stay with me, and I'm like, inside, don't do it, and I don't do it? Yes, of course.
But any instances where you were like, well, I guess kind of in that same vein, where you were, I would imagine it was probably a roller coaster of emotions and times and figuring things out, but were there times where you were disappointed in humanity? Like, oh my God, it is worse than that? Or was it the exact opposite? Yeah.
Of course, there were times I was disappointed in humanity, right? There were times I'm disappointed in myself.
Yeah.
And I'm just a mirror of humanity, and humanity is just a mirror of me. So good things happen, bad things happen. There were times when I was rejected left, right, and center. Wasn't particularly pleased. There were times when people were mean to me. There were times where people send me messages on Instagram and Facebook or whatever, telling me that I'm not a particularly pleasant human being. There are times when people send me messages saying you're the best thing I've ever seen in my life. So you have to kind of like, you know, take it all with a pinch of salt. Yeah. But yeah, I'm not sitting here saying, I don't want anyone to leave here thinking, oh, Leon, he's being Pollyannish, and all he says is we just have to be kind and everything's going to work itself out. I mean, you know, that's not the reality. Bad things happen. But like I said, believe it or not, good things happen.
But to me, I think that's kind of the antidote to get out when you find yourself in the mud moments where you're like, oh, God, humanity's let me down, or that's part of the that's kind of the price of admission, right? Because those in the mud moments are the moments where you can choose, because you still have a choice. Even if you're in the mud, no one can take that choice away from you, what you do next. Nobody can take that away from you. And if you act in kindness or whatever, that's the point. That's how you get out of the mud, right?
Yeah, and a wise man once said to me that when you open up your heart, you're probably going to get crushed.
Yeah.
But you have to pick yourself up and do it again. Not with the wrong people, right? You've got to be careful. I'm not telling people to go out and like open their heart to the mean neighbor next door, right? Don't do that, ever. But I am telling you to find someone or a community where you can feel safe and to open up your heart. Because if you don't, you're not going to be truly living.
No, yeah, it's going to be stagnation and mediocrity, right? And like the price of admission to have the full richness of it means you're going to have a few instances where it's going to get bruised or crushed even. That's the price of admission to the richness. If you choose to ignore it, it's just kind of bland mediocrity.
Right.
Or worse, abject loneliness and depression. Right?
Yes.
At its best case, it's stagnant and mediocre. In its worst case, it's really dark.
Right. Well, that's fairly depressing now, guys.
Well, that's depressing. That's good. I mean, but I think
I'm like, okay, we got to pick the show back up.
No, but I mean, but I mean, that's the price of admission,
yes,
right?
I agree with you. I agree.
If you're going to get a couple nicks.
If you don't put yourself out there,
you're not going to experience the joy and the freedom
and growth and connection and community. All of that has a significant amount of discomfort and potentially pain that comes with it. But on the other side of that, and I think we've talked about it. On the other side of that, that's where the richness of life lives. Right. I mean, you can't. If you're comfortable, and you're not. That's not growth. And to some point, you are stagnant. Right. So we're either growing or we're not growing. At least that's my perspective, I guess. And so you wrote you did your travels. You wrote the Kindness Diaries. That turned into a series on the Discovery Channel, right? Discovery Plus, I think, right? You did 2 series there, but then you also came out with this Go Be Kind book. So what inspired Go Be Kind? And then it's different, right? So the Kindness Diaries is more about your adventure, kind of almost a chronicle, but this is more of like an instructional how-to. And I love the way you wrote it. Actually, he wrote something in here to my kids. He said, "Sam and Sophie, always remember to love each other with all your might." And I was like, that's cool. You were signing a lot of books, so to take the time to do that, I thought was pretty cool. But you've written it in such an interesting format. It's almost written, I'm thinking about reading it with my son.
Oh yeah, it's like handwritten.
Who's 6?
Doodles.
Yeah, it's like right, and but it's also to-dos, right? There's to-dos in here for literally 28 and a half to-dos of things that can lead. So what inspired this? I guess what was this is just a different. I actually really enjoy it because of the way it's written and because of the, I won't say lightness, but just because of the ease of the thoughts. And for me, it's easy because I can read a chapter in a couple minutes, 5 or 10 minutes. I've read one of the chapters, so I feel like I've accomplished something. But but then I have to do something with it. But what inspired that? What inspired it?
So people would always say to me, "Oh, Leon, it was great that you went and did this great kindness adventure, but I can't quit my job. I can't travel around the world with a line of kindness." And I get it. I understand. It's not easy. And maybe you can't quit your job and go and travel around the world with kindness. But that doesn't mean you can't go and have a kindness adventure. Mm-hmm. So that's what the book was about. It was your own little Kindness Diaries adventure in your own community, in your own life, in a way where you could see tangible changes happening right before your eyes. And that's what Go Be Kind is. It's a way to get out of your comfort zone, touch a few lives, including your own, and spread a little kindness, have a little bit of human connectivity put back into your life, and have some fun along the way. Why not?
Mm-hmm. And that's definitely the way you wrote it. It is a lighter kind of, and again, almost like you're reading a children's book to some degree, the way it's written and the way the pictures and everything. So literally I am thinking about reading it with my son, just because I think he's only 6, but I think he would kind of get what you're saying. And it was interesting also, now that I'm talking about kids, that I noticed at the talk you did the other night, there was several kids in the audience, and I noticed that the kids asked much better questions and many more questions than the adults did. I was actually blown away by the amount, just the thoughtfulness of the kids thinking about kindness.
What were they asking?
They were asking all kinds of things about his adventures, like where was the coolest place he'd ever been, and who was the neatest person he'd ever met, and what was the best lesson he'd learned. But they were just I was like, wow, they were just very, I thought, I wonder, and I guess in my own way, in my own thoughts, I was wondering, I think I won't say easier for kids, but maybe they haven't been beat up as much, or they're a little more connected to the all that is, or something. And so for them, kindness is just like, yeah, this is a thing. We should be doing this, right? And they were very curious.
Exactly. I think kids haven't become adults yet, which is good. Mm-hmm. And adults, unfortunately, have forgotten how to be kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And one of the tricks in life as an adult is never to lose touch with your childlike wonder and your curiosity. Because once you lose contact with that inner kid, you're doomed, right? Because that's where the magic is. That's where the people who are not conditioned are. It's just such an important piece of the puzzle. And that's why I wrote the book like that as well. Because the book, you're right, it can be read by a kid and it can be read by an adult. And hopefully when the adult is reading it, it's really his kid or her kid that's reading, like that kid inside, right?
Right.
Yeah, tapping into that curiosity is key, right? I've had many conversations with people. It's like, how do you, if you've lost it, I've heard people say, well, I'm just not curious. And I just don't believe that. I think as human beings, you're born curious, right? I mean, you watch a baby or a kid, they're just insatiably curious. And so I'm of the belief that somewhere it gets tamped down along the way. And I wish more people would just be insatiably curious and seek it, because I do think it's the key to a lot of this, unlocking some of this, or getting some of that clarity and alignment out of the kind of victimization that we all seem to kind of succumb to, right? And it's easy to fall into victimhood rather. We're all victimized by something at some point, but we can't succumb to victimhood, right? And that's what to me it's like being insatiably curious, adding value to others, being kind to others. That kind of unlocks you, it frees you from that victimhood, in my opinion. I don't know. How different, if you look back now you've had some time and marination to look back at all these experiences and these amazing, wonderful experiences, how different are you? I mean, I think you've kind of answered that in the periphery, but if you could say how the Leon that you was that you started this and the Leon that you are today, I mean, what's the biggest change?
I'd say the biggest change is that I live more so from my heart, not quickly by any stretch. I'm still introverted, so there are still moments where I prefer my own company than to other people's company. I would say another big difference is we live in a world filled with chaos, yet beneath that chaos is stillness.
Yeah.
And if you can get into that place of stillness, even in the chaos, no one can touch you.
I agree, 100%.
And I'm working on that, and there are masters at that, and I'm not one of them yet, but God willing, the stillness will be greater than the chaos one day.
And I think you shared with me a little bit of the answer, but how are you tapping into more of that stillness, like that you're aspiring to be a master at? I guess what's that look like practically for you?
Meditation, nature. I have a system where I find a song that touches my soul, and I listen to it on repeat. And I listen to it on repeat for an hour.
Oh wow!
And it gets me into a meditative state of calmness. Music is a profoundly important tool to help regulate our nervous systems. And I've used it over the years many, many times.
I love that. I do that too. I think music is very important. Mm-hmm. I love the stillness piece. You've heard me say being the composed force in a chaotic situation. I think that's the key. If you can get that, you're untouchable. The world is your oyster, and I don't mean that from a sense that you grab things and acquire things. Right. I just mean that you nothing can touch you. If you can get comfortable being the composed force in a chaotic situation, it's the ultimate in empowerment, in my opinion. Yeah, I love it. I love what you're doing, man. Mm-hmm. Good stuff. How can people reach out to you and learn more about you and connect with you?
So they can go to Instagram at The Kindness Guy or Facebook. They can also watch The Kindness Diaries on Discovery Plus, Season 1 and Season 2. And, I reply to all my messages. So if you want to reach out and maybe you don't have anyone to share with, well, if you send me a message and share your pain, I am someone safe for you to do that.
Awesome.
Very gracious.
Did we cover everything that we needed to in our short time?
I think, do you want to talk about anything that you're working on currently, or you want to save that for another show? Kind of what's that?
I mean, we're working on a few things. Documentary is going to come out soon, which is a seeking documentary, finding home, let's say. I think I told you, Richard, what it is, but others will have to wait and see. Sorry, I can't give too much away.
Well, you gave me a sneak peek of the trailer. I'll say I was very curious, and the trailer looked really good. So I'll just let you know that, thank you for the sneak peek. I won't disclose what it was, but the sneak peek was really good. I thought it was very interesting, and I was enjoying watching some of the experiences that you were having in your adventures in your next documentary. So we'd love to have you come back on the show and talk about that when you're ready to release it.
Beautiful. I will for sure.
Yeah. All right, sir. Leon, thanks for coming on the show. We really appreciate it, and we'll have all those links in our show notes. But, man, so great and inspired that you came on the show today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Next Level Method podcast. If you found some value in this, tell somebody about the show. Tell your friends, tell your spouse, tell your kids. Let them know all about Next Level Method. And go to nextlevelmethod.com to learn more and join our community. Thanks for tuning in.